A big welcome to all the viewers watching Soul to Soul Talk Show. In this episode, we have with us Brother Eric from New York, and we will be continuing this journey as we had started in the previous episode. Welcome to the show, brother.
Thanks for having me again.
Thanks for coming again. Brother, in the previous episode, you told us that you had visited India and you learned the art of Raj Yoga and how it influenced your life.
Correct.
And this art of Raj Yoga is taught by the Brahma Kumaris. So how did you come in contact with the Brahma Kumaris?
I was living in the United States in a city called Chicago, Chicago, Illinois, which is in the middle of the country. And I was working, and I worked out of my home, so I would travel in the car to different places back and forth. And I used to listen to a radio program. It was an interview show, a little like this. There was someone who was wise and clever and prepared, a little like yourself.
Like yourself?
Like yourself. And they would interview leading thought individuals, whether it was in business or the arts or spirituality. And it was a very nice show. New Dimensions was the name of the show. Yeah, it was wonderful. Out of San Francisco. And at one time they had interviewed someone who was associated with the Brahma Kumaris. Her name is Sister Shanti, and she was involved from the London center headquarters at that time. She still is, actually. And what she said, I heard in a way that resonated. I liked what she said. There was something about what she said and how she said it that made some sense to me at that time. And this was a long time ago. It was before internet, it was before email, it was before electronic things. And so at the end of radio programs, they would say, if you want more information, write to this address. Okay? And so I took that down, I wrote that down, and I wrote a little note saying, I heard the talk, very interested, can you tell me some more? And the Brahma Kumaris had a center in San Francisco, because this was a rebroadcast, it wasn't live.
Okay.
And so I sent a letter, and a month later a reply came back saying, you know, we were busy, we had all sorts, yes, we have things, here's a book list, here's some of the things that we do. And I looked at that and I said, well, you know, maybe I should order a book. It's very easy to order a book. Amazon wasn't invented, you couldn't go online, it wasn't. So you filled out a little form and you put a check and you mailed it back. And then a month later, I got a couple books, but the one I ordered was the correspondence course, okay? And so I learned Raja Yoga meditation
Yourself?
through the correspondence course. Because when I was learning 27 years ago, the United States had about 6 or 7 or 8 centers, New York, Florida, Texas, California. And I was literally about 1,000 miles away from anybody who knew anything about this. And so I took the course one lesson at a time. And you know, there was a lesson on soul, there was a lesson on God, there was a lesson on karma. And I would get something in the mail and I would read it, and then it would sit for a couple days, and then I'd go back to it and I'd answer some questions, and I'd put that in the mail, and it would take a couple days, and then they would set it for a while. So it took about a month for each lesson.
For each lesson?
For each lesson.
Okay.
So it took me about 9 months to do the 7 days course in that sense. And after the third month or so, I ordered some other books that were written by very experienced yoga practitioners here. There's someone who I had met later on, Brother Jagdish was his name. He was done a lot of books, and so I read some of his books, The Way and Goal of a Raj Yogi, for example, and so learned with a little written guidance and some of the original writings from very experienced individuals from India. and was able to make sense that, this is what is right for me, that I'm a spiritual being, that there's a spiritual being who I can have a relationship, that I'm eternal. Time, my background was engineering, so kind of things had to make sense. 1 + 1 = 2, so right and karma, those things all I could make sense with. And so naturally just kind of felt an affinity. And so for 1.5 years, I had been practicing this based on the literature of the Brahma Kumaris by myself. And then I met someone, they came to visit, and then they said at a long time ago, well, there's not much happening here, maybe you could help teach others. And so I got involved that way because I felt this was a very true and very powerful and very correct for me.
Was there no concept in this knowledge that contradicted, say, the beliefs, say the laws that you had learnt in science, or
No.
anything that you have learnt that you had believed before?
It didn't. For me, it made perfect sense. For example, in engineering, we get a lot of physics and
Right.
linear analysis and way too much stuff that I don't remember anymore. But one of the laws of thermodynamics is matter's eternal. And you can't create or destroy matter, but you can change its form. Well, if you can't create it, then it's always been there. It's eternal. And so where does it go? How does it do these things? That was a belief. And so when you recognize it on the spiritual level, the soul, the being is eternal, then it's just an interplay and it's a change. And I was quite fascinated because in the United States and maybe other places, they have differences of opinion about time. That there's a beginning and an end of time. God, let there be light, and then there's Judgment Day is a common belief by many. And I think that's true. And there's also this sense that time is eternal. There's no beginning and there's no end. And I also believe that's true.
How can both be true?
Well, if you have a beginning and an end, and you bring the beginning and end together, then you have a beginning and an end, but it becomes cyclical, and so it's eternal. And so it very naturally brings two contrary ideas together. Okay? And somehow I feel I'm alive. Maybe you can tell that I'm here and such like that. And I feel alive. And I also feel that there's a spiritual aspect to myself. And so that concept of soul was there. And for me, if somehow I'm a spiritual being and I can organize matter around myself as a body and I can hold on to that living, I don't know how I do that. I really don't. I don't know how I'm alive, but I am.
Yes.
And if I'm doing it once, I could probably do it again. So when the body stops, whatever the relationship between soul and matter takes place, it can take place again. I can probably have had other experiences. And so in this cycle of time, I can probably have more than one life. And it makes sense to me. Also learned that this might not be my only place of existence. That in the Western concept, in the spiritual experiences that I grew up with, there was a place beyond. Okay, they call it heaven. But there's lots of concepts, there's lots of words, there's lots of names for that. And in the East, in Raja Yoga, different name, same place. So it was a matter that if I'm a spiritual being, there must be a spiritual place that I'm comfortable with. If there's one person, soul like me, there's probably someone else like you. So I start to see people different. If we have a relationship on a spiritual level, there's maybe a family, then God comes into it. So a lot of things, that's probably why it took me 9 months to think some of these things through. But I went from the perspective of a belief and adding things onto it and questioning why it works, as opposed to many people, what's wrong with it, and if I find one thing that doesn't make sense, then I disregard everything. So it was a positive questioning to figure out how I worked and what my experiences were and how I might learn more about that. And what I was taught and what I read seemed to fulfill that quite well.
Even the art of meditation, you practiced it yourself. There was no one to guide you?
Not in the way that many are guided.
Right.
They didn't have many commentaries, so there was just music. And so basically that's correct. read some things and think about some things. I think when we start to use some of the principles, it would be a principle both in spirituality and physics, that whatever you put your attention on grows.
Right.
Whatever you think about starts to get pulled into you. It's like a spotlight. And I wish I was a genius and could tell you exactly what the law of science is, but there's the indeterminate principle that when you look at something, you make it happen. In physics and science at a subatomic level, there's that process that takes place. And that very much makes sense with the laws of consciousness. That what I start to think about, I start to create, I start to act, I start to empower. And so meditation is very scientific for me. Okay, how do I start to empower the qualities that I want? Well, I start to think of those, and I start to think of those, and I start to act with those. I start to share those. I start to move into that experience, and I'm able to apply all of that process.
So you talk to yourself in meditation? Or?
In the beginning, you know, and it's if I had to define meditation, it's just conscious thinking. Okay, what am I thinking now? What is the experience or feeling or consequence of that? Do I want more of that, yes or no? Okay, and is my thought filled with peace? Is my thought filled with love? Is my thought filled with the joy or the harmony that is natural and essential for myself? And if I'm thinking along those lines, then I think I'm doing it right. And if I'm thinking in a way where there's anger or fear or negativity or sorrow, that's not how I want to lead my life.
Right.
Those aren't the qualities that I like to have. And so they're not my natural qualities. And if I'm a spiritual being, then let me just nurture that spiritual side of myself. And so that was kind of the practice. How do I start to control my thinking, guide my thinking, activate the qualities that I want in my life, and make myself more naturally who I am?
And you said you got a real perspective, a real 3D picture of God in this course. So who is God now?
Yeah, who is God
for
now? Many things. It's quite amazing because it can be anybody I want. It can be my friend, it can be my companion, it can be my mother, it can be my father. And quite amazing, I think God has the same abilities that you and I do. That how we think of Him is how He appears. Okay? And it's quite interesting. It's wonderful for me to think about that however I think of and however I call and however I address that being is how He comes to me. I'll use you as an example possibly, that you have a name that you go by, but you might be called by your mother one thing, you might be called by your friends something else, you might be called by younger people something, you might be called by old, but it's still you.
Right.
And so the person who addresses you kind of decides how you are going to respond. They are the one who's in control of that relationship. They're the one who you change for. It's still you, but you reply to the grandmother differently. You reply to the child differently. You reply to your friend differently. You reply to your parents differently. But it's still you. And I think God's very similar to you. Yet when we think of the one who gives peace, peace comes. If we want to think of God as, you know, the supporter of Christ or as Krishna or as something else, that's how He comes to us, because that's how we call, that's how we see, and that's how He cares to share that personality. Very wonderful being.
So you control the relationship you have.
You control the relationship with God. Yeah, He will come. And if you say, you know, I don't need you in my life, He says, okay, I appreciate that. Whatever you want. God is our servant. He is also available. He's a good servant. He's the one who can give you anything that you want. But you have to be able to ask, and you have to be able to listen. Listening is a big part of the meditation, being available for experience and feelings and understanding, and being able to quiet the mind, able to let go of some of the desires we might want, and to be able to be in tune with maybe what God wants for us also.
By listen, you mean you listen to God's response, or what do you mean by listen?
Have you ever listened?
Yes,
okay.
I'm listening to you.
Okay, and when you're listening, you put your attention into what's coming to you. And so when you walk outside, if you listen to nature, you kind of silence your mind and you become available, and it transforms the experience. What you're able to do when you listen is to somehow put the energy of creating and thinking out of your head into a more receptive feeling. And so you're able to allow different things to come in and allow those things to activate experiences. And so when we listened for what God might say, then we're able to feel the peace, have the love increase, have an understanding, have that sense that there's care. And so we can also have feelings and experiences in relationship. You know, if I'm looking to be nurtured, if I'm feeling a little down, then maybe if I had a little more love from my mother in my life, then God can bring that feeling in and I can experience that. But I need to not worry so much about getting it, but allow and request and open myself up for that response.
So to master this art of listening and to control your mind, did you have to bring in any physical, lifestyle changes?
I kind of did it through, yes, I'll answer your question. Yes, I did change my lifestyle because it was something that I had read and I believed in. I believed what it was because I tried to reason it through. That in my experience, one was my timetable, what I did during the day. I'm pretty average American, you know. I would have watched TV, I would have gone out, I would have done things, and they were fun. They were fine. I have no sorrow about that. But I also realized that there was a spiritual part that I wanted to nurture, and I wanted more of that. And during the day, when I was busy, at the end of the day, didn't have the energy. And would ask you and all your viewers to try it. It's a quiet energy in the morning. And so it's easier to listen, it's easier to think, it's easier to practice the things of the mind, the spiritual qualities. And so I started to get up earlier than I used to. And I found that that was beneficial. That when I practice thinking and practice experiencing and practice being more peaceful, that energy, that experience was more available to me during the day. And so therefore I was able to access that. So I became more spiritually powerful if I got up earlier and practiced these things and kind of let go of some of the things that took away my energy. I stopped watching TV.
Oh, you never watch TV now?
I watch it on the flights over. Few things. I don't have a TV because I have other priorities. Not to say that your listeners should throw their TV away. This is a good program. But it seemed to me that, I listen to things differently. And so being able to edit what goes on in the world saved me a lot of time. And I was able to use that time in more personally advantageous ways. So I changed a lot of things. I changed my schedule, I changed my diet. Had read quite a bit and still am always interested in what it is that we take in through the mind affects our life. And so practicing nurturing with thoughts of peace and things like that are helpful. But also what you take into your body, obviously has an effect. If you drink too much soda, you can get all that sugar. A lot of people are obese in the United States because of this. If you eat what we call junk food, there's no calories, you eat more. There's consequences. And so if you eat food that is pure or organic or elevated or appropriate and you prepare it in that way, then it's advantageous both physically and spiritually. You have the ability to do that. So I started looking at what I did, started fixing different things. Some things I let go of.
I became a
vegetarian. I grew up in the Midwest in the United States, and it's known as farming community. I grew up in a small town, small city, but there were lots of big farms around. And they grew, corn and soybeans and cows and pigs and chickens, and they fed a lot of the country. There's a lot of animals out there. And you grow up, and that's just how what was around. And there was nothing wrong with that. There was, I had a big kind of a conversation in my mind that the culture that I grew up in was fine. There was nothing wrong with it. But I wanted to do something even better for myself. I wanted to understand how I could access a spiritual part, and I believe that certain foods, certain ways the foods were created, would affect my mind. And I wanted to make that stronger and more powerful. And so letting go of some things and increasing others, I found to be beneficial for myself.
In this episode, Eric shared a few more of his experiences as a Raj Yogi, and he will be there with us in yet another episode to take us further on the spiritual journey. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. Thank you, brother, for spending your time with us.
Thanks for having me again.
Thank you, viewers, and do join us in the next episode. Have a good time.